What's up, everybody? It's Jordan, and welcome to the Sports Behind Show. Today is May 23rd, 2021. And on today's episode, I'm joined by special guest Tony Tucker. How you doing today, Tony?
I'm doing great, Jordan. Thank you so much for having me. So many things to get into. Anybody new watching this? Jordan's the man. A lot of great stuff going on. Following a passion here. Uh, Check me out more at Warzone Sports Network. Tons of great live shows, activities, live streams, all sorts of fun things happening over there. What are we getting into today, Jordan?
Well, we have a lot of stuff to get into. Mostly NBA, which I would prefer. Much more NFL news. But when it's close to July, there's not much NFL news. But we have lots of stuff to talk about. And you mentioned the Warzone Sports Network. That is a really, really nice channel. Make sure to go check that out. They had an amazing mock draft, with different celebrities, NFL players, and people from NFL Network and tons of stuff. Definitely one of the coolest mock drafts I have ever seen. So we'll go ahead and kind of get started with, some of these topics here. This topic was last week, and this happened the day after I recorded my weekly episode of last week. Kemba Walker was actually traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder. What were your thoughts kind of on the Walker going to OKC?
That this is not something that's going to last. He won't stay there long. They're building with youth. They're building with the idea of getting salaries that are dumpable, tradable, keeping money off the books. And really, for the Celtics, like they needed to get out from underneath that contract too. Like that needed to be something that was that was off of their books because they have a lot of issues, right? There's rumors that are already happening with the Celtics where it's like maybe they get Karl Anthony Towns from Minnesota, and that's a big centerpiece that they could use to go with Brown and Tatum. But Kemba was not the guy. They don't need more guards. They can get an average point guard to play next to two guys who also have the ability to handle the ball. And Kemba Walker's he's been banged up. He's fun. He's an exciting player. He's a good player, not a great player. So I think this was a good move for Boston. OKC gets a guy that they'll let play. Maybe he brings in fans. I don't really think he has that kind of appeal either. But OKC's been on this for a minute. Sam Presti's just collecting draft picks, and we'll see what happens long term. But this felt like more of a salary dump for Boston. But and they get back Average Al, as one of my good friends calls Al Horton, who was in Boston before. But yeah, he sent me a text message and goes, "We got back Average Al," and he was kind of excited because he likes Al Horford as a veteran big man that the Celtics could use.
Yeah, you mentioned, more draft picks for Thunder. I believe Sam Presti has collected now over the next 7 seasons, 18 first-round picks or something just insane. You would never hear. I mean, that's really, really, really difficult to do, even on like a 2K, basketball game. Like that is video game type of trades. Keep on getting first-round picks. And last week I was joined by Mike on the Mike Sports, and I know he's a big Lakers fan, and I was kind of talking to him. I'm actually a big Celtics fan, and I was telling him the day before this trade happened that the Horford, signing when it happened, that was a major, major bust. I expected Al Horford to be, much better than his first stint with Boston. Did not think he would, return to Boston, especially in a Kemba Walker trade. They did, free up some cap space. It was, the Thunder got Kemba Walker, and a first-round pick and a 2025 second, where the Celtics got Al Horford and Moses Brown. He's a big guy, but this frees up cap space, and there's a chance they could maybe go after, Evan Fournier. They traded him during the season. They traded him for 2 second-round picks, knowing that his contract was ending. To me, I would be fine with Fournier if you're able to extend him. I would kind of feel like the Celtics ended up winning this trade. But to me, I'm much rather going after a big guy. The Celtics have desperately needed a big guy for years. I mean, like I said, they signed Horford back in the summer, I believe 2015 or 16, And they still need another guy. Tristan Thompson's a free agent. There's lots of big guys available. I know Hassan Whiteside's a free agent. He's not great, but I would like to see more depth. Power forward and center position, because you have the guards. You have Marcus Smart, who I think is pretty underrated. Brown and Tatum, those are great guys. But to me, this kind of shows that Brad Stevens liked Al Horford a lot more than Danny Ainge did. Instead of re-signing him, first thing Brad Stevens does is get his old player back that he used to coach. Jason Tatum said in interviews that Al Horford was a great leader and a big part of their team. One thing about this, though, Al Horford is 35 years old. He's making over $20 million in the next 2 seasons. This is not a championship move. And I know, the Celtics have a nice team. They're one of the better rosters in the East, but they've not been to the finals with all their amazing players over the past several seasons. I don't think this is going to help them get over the hump to maybe, beat the Hawks, the 76ers, or whoever it may be, even the Bucks. Because, when you're playing the Bucks, you need a big guy to compete with, Giannis. And they do not have that guy at all. Horford is a good, locker room guy. But I just don't think this really helps Boston in the long term. Moses Brown, though, that's kind of an interesting, toss-up. I think he might be decent with Boston. I believe he averaged around 7 or 8 points and 7 or 8 rebounds per game. Maybe he can be a big part of their future. But to me, I understand, getting some cap space and maybe re-signing some of your guys that you may lose in free agency. But this is a move the Celtics, as of right now, you're definitely not better than you were a week or so ago. I'm kind of have mixed feelings about this. One day I'll be fine about it. The other day I'll be ticked off about it. It's just really, I have mixed emotions about this. I don't hate it. I don't love it by any means.
This is not a move to better the roster. This is a move to allow maneuverability. You can move Al Horford's contract easier than you could move the Kemba Walker deal, right? So and Al also provides a little bit of veteran leadership. If somebody's looking for that on their team, I think the Celtics have enough veteran leadership. Even though Tatum and Brown are young, they've played deep into the playoffs. They have a lot of experience. So they are sort of old but young at the same time, because that's what experience will do to you. So even though Tatum's 23, he's been through a lot of wars. He's ready to go. I do think Al Horford is a bonus in where they struggled. I think he's a better player than Tristan Thompson, but in spurts. But you're right. They need they haven't had a anchor since KG, right? And they had Kendrick Perkins before that. They had some guys in there, but really they've been without a center. And that's been one of the problems, that they've been getting dominated down low. Al Horford definitely does not clear up all of those problems. And they need they need to acquire a guy like Karl Anthony Towns, who would be a premier center if he went to the Celtics.
And something else with that trade, the Celtics cleared their first round pick this season. First round picks in the NBA, it seems like there's a lot more busts in the NBA draft in the first round opposed to the NFL draft. And I don't know how to feel about them trading their first round pick. I know you have to give up quite a bit of draft capital to just dump off a huge salary like Kemba Walker. But Charles Bassey from West Kentucky, I'm not really much into the NBA draft at all. But the limited games I've seen him, I'm a big Marshall fan, and he plays for West Kentucky. They play each other quite often, throughout the season. He is a guy who I think could be a really nice star in the NBA. He kind of reminds me a little bit of DeAndre Ayton. And, that's probably going to be about where he goes, 14, 15, 16, along the lines of that. And, we've seen big guys in the draft, like Porzingis and, Luka and those type of guys. I'm not saying there's going to be one of those guys in the draft, but I really don't love the idea of them trading the first round pick when there's a couple really nice big guys, there around their spot. And instead, you're getting Al Horford, who is 35 years old. And by the time his contract, ends up with Boston, he's probably just going to retire at the end of his contract. It's just really interesting. I would be fine if the Celtics re-signed Evan Fournier. I would think they won this deal. but I would much rather see them sign a top premier guy, or maybe even trade for like a guy like you said, Karl Anthony Towns. But I don't know what you're going to have to trade. I think it's you're going to have to trade Smart and a couple of picks and a couple other things. But it's one of those things with Boston. I just absolutely hate the last several seasons. Everybody talks about how Danny Ainge, he's a mastermind when it comes to trades. Past 3 years, I know they traded for Evan Fournier, but that was trading him to the Orlando Magic, who got rid of absolutely everybody. They're a rebuilding team. They're wanting to get rid of Evan Fournier. The Celtics are not nearly as making moves as people think. They had the number one pick. They traded back to three and got Tatum. The Kyrie trade years ago, which at the time looked great, they completely lost that trade to the Cavs. I'm really hoping the Celtics can make some moves, kind of similar to this Walker deal. With Brad Stevens, taking over, Danny Ainge's spot. It's going to be really interesting to see, how Boston kind of revamps their, roster heading into the 2021 season.
Yeah, I think don't put too much emphasis on draft picks because I'm not sure where the Celtics was at, but the guy that they're getting, he's going to be a development project. So it's not even that you want that you can find other developmental projects in other places, waivers, D leagues, whatever it is. And like you said, they got back Moses Brown. He's going to be a developmental project for them anyways. And you also need to figure out who the coach is, what the style is going to be. But the big man, the dream big man is, Jokic or Embiid or something like that. But if you can get Aiton, which we saw in last night's game, that can be a very good center. Like you can win games with that kind of center. He doesn't have to shoot threes and be able to go outside like a 7'3" Porzingis. I saw Nick Mack jump in here a second ago. I know how he feels about his Mavericks and Porzingis, so maybe he can go to Boston.
That's actually something else. When this trade happened, I my initial reactions were I absolutely hated the trade because there was lots of talks, lots of rumors. Kemba Walker for Porzingis was a actual thing.
Yeah.
I would much rather have Porzingis than Al Horford. He's literally about around 10 years younger. I know his contract, it's somewhat similar to a little more than Horford, but at that standpoint, you're getting a lot younger. I know Brad Stevens wants that locker room guy and a big, leadership guy like Al Horford, a guy who's been in the league for about a decade and a half now. But I would much rather see them, have a guy like Porzingis as opposed to getting Al Horford. But I'm very interested to see what the Celtics do. I definitely think they're one of the most intriguing teams heading into the, free agency and everything like that. And you kind of mentioned head coaching with the Celtics, who their next head coach might be. That kind of goes into our next topic here. There's quite a few, head coach openings in the NBA. Is there anybody, in particular who you think might, end up, in Boston or Portland or New Orleans or any place like that?
No, I don't really have strong feelings on where they're going, obviously, but there's guys, and even the lady Becky Hammond. I wouldn't mind seeing getting a job, although I think maybe waiting for the San Antonio job would be the best for her. But Chauncey Billups is somebody that's intriguing to me. Just the style of basketball that he played, the place where he's coaching at, with the Clippers. I definitely think there's room there. The jobs to me that are my favorite, obviously, are in Dallas and in Boston. If you can get Luca or you can get Tatum, to me, that's exactly where you want to be. These are two guys that I feel really have the ability to take you to a championship. And if you can, it's like, trying to get with young Kobe Bryant or LeBron James or something like that. You have somebody to me that has that ability to take you to places that you wouldn't be able to get to with the average NBA player. I also think there is some appeal with Giannis. If you're a player development guy, maybe like a Mark Jackson type of a coach, where he showed his ability to develop and work with young talent in Golden State. Off the top of my head, maybe like a retread, like a D'Antoni. Like if you have a team that wants to play up tempo, high energy basketball. But I'd also like to see Sam Cassell is another guy that I want to see get a head coaching job. Um, and I could see him working in a place like Dallas, maybe. I don't know if Nick's still here or not. I don't know if he loves that idea. And then the last name, just that's, I just blanked on the last name. You give me your thoughts on who you want in Boston, and the name is going to pop back into my head in a second. Jason Kidd.
To me, Boston, I was very vocal about this, on my last week episode, talking about who I want as Boston's coach, and it's not being talked about enough. I know it doesn't really make any sense, and it's not being talked about at all. I would love to see Kevin McHale back in Boston. I think it makes a lot of sense. His first 5 full seasons as the NBA coach, he improved his team's roster every single season. He coached 11 games his last year as a coach, and they were 4-7 with the Rockets. And I believe that was the year that Dwight Howard, who, it seems like the past decade or so, whoever's a coach with Dwight Howard, they have a bad record. And it was also with Howard and James Harden. This was a very dysfunctional team. And Kevin McHale, he's a Celtics legend. He's an NBA Hall of Famer. I think it makes a lot of sense. He knows like the Celtics legacy and everything with their franchise. Realistically, though, I think it might be Chauncey Billups or Jason Kidd. I would much rather prefer Kevin McHale over those two guys. It's not even close. I think Jason Kidd is extremely overrated. I would much rather have a guy like McHale who's not coaching the league for quite some time, who has a much better resume, than opposed to Jason Kidd, who's been out of the league for a few years, who did not have a great record like some people think. A couple other ones, Portland. There's lots of talks. Maybe they maybe get Becky Hammond, who's the assistant coach currently with the San Antonio Spurs. But I would like to see Mike D'Antoni with Portland. I know lots of people are kind of upset. D'Antoni should not get another job. He's never won a finals as an NBA head coach. I think it would be really smart to pair Damian Lillard, one of the best scorers in the NBA, a great three-point shooter, and they also have CJ McCollum as well, with Mike D'Antoni. They only do free throws, threes, and layups, it seems like, in the D'Antoni system, and I think there'll be a great pairing to get him with Damian Lillard. The interesting thing about D'Antoni is you look at the D'Antoni offense, whether it's Mike D'Antoni or even Dan D'Antoni, who's actually the current coach at Marshall. The point guard of that offense is going to be absolutely amazing because that's their main guy. You look at James Harden; his stats were absolutely ridiculous with Mike D'Antoni with the Rockets. Kyrie Irving. He's been really nice with the Nets, and D'Antoni's currently the assistant coach with the Nets. And even look at Dan D'Antoni in at Marshall. They have one of the most underrated college basketball players of all time. I'm not being biased. You can actually look at the stats. John Elmore. He is absolutely insane. They also had, Steve Nash with the Suns. Whoever the point guard is that basically that offense by themselves. And I think that'd be a great pairing for Damian Lillard to maybe get him to the next step and make him a top 5, top 3 player in the NBA. And Becky Hammond, to me, I know there's lots of talks about Portland or maybe someplace else, maybe even New Orleans with the Pelicans. Honestly, I think the best spot for Becky Hammond, and it's not even close, is to definitely wait out until Greg Popovich retires. He's one of the best coaches in NBA history. The Spurs went to the playoffs for 21 straight seasons, and they have missed the playoffs now for the last 2 years. I would not be surprised if Greg Popovich maybe retires at the end of the next season and Becky Hammond, takes over because Hammond has learned, so much from Popovich, who's just a legendary head coach. I think it would make a lot of sense for Hammond to stay in San Antonio one more year, then eventually become the next head coach of the San Antonio Spurs once Greg Popovich retires.
Okay, I got to take a little issue with something that you said there. D'Antoni in Portland would be horrible because that is exactly what Dame doesn't need. Dame does not need somebody that caters, like, get him to the next level. He didn't get Steve Nash, two-time MVP, to the next level. He didn't get James Harden, an MVP, to the next level. He makes exciting basketball, but I think that's the opposite. I think that he really needs a coach that makes good adjustments and that comes in and preaches just a little bit of defense because that's Portland's issue. It's not talent. They have talent all around, but at some point you have to make some moves. I really think that some of these head coaching positions, they really can't be filled until after the season and we see some movement because Ben Simmons is going to be moved, at least in my opinion. If Daryl Morey's the GM and he's all about analytics, that means that he's got to. Ben Simmons has got to be gone. That's not his kind of guy. We all heard he was very aggressive for James Harden and was dangling Ben Simmons out there, or maybe he didn't, but now he definitely would going forward. Becky Hammond in San Antonio, it's like there's a familiarity there. The players that are already on the roster, they have a lot of good young talent. White, DeJounte Murray, like there's some good players to work with on that roster. And one of the things and the reasons that Coach Pop has been so successful is he's found the Patty Mills, he's found the Bruce Bowens over the years. Like he's gotten a lot out of, the end of Will Purdue at one point. Like there's just guys that you can do that. And if Becky Hammond can have that same ability to get the most out of somebody that people kind of overlooked, then she can also have success in that same system. And they'll be patient, I believe.
Yeah, you do make a good point though about Portland. One thing about D'Antoni's offense, if you don't score 120 points or 110, you're basically going to lose because their defense is horrendous. They really don't make adjustments. It's like shoot threes. You want to keep on shooting threes until you make them, and you're not going to stop shooting them at all the whole game. I am kind of interested to see where D'Antoni will end up. I'm just very interested to see what happens in Boston. Honestly, I am kind of thinking it's going to be Chauncey Billups or Jason Kidd, even though I do not want either one of those guys. Some other head coaching spots open too as well, like New Orleans. And it's going to be very interesting to see where some of the next head coaches of those places will be. Because if you're an NBA head coach, you definitely want to be a head coach as Zion Williamson, who's going to be a huge star in the NBA. And kind of switching gears to another topic, in the NBA now. This is easily the most I've talked about the NBA on one episode. I really don't follow it a ton. I really wish this was just NFL stuff. But Detroit, they were announced yesterday. They had the number one pick in the NBA, lottery draft. I am a big Celtics fan, but I'm also a big Cavs fan. And I was really hoping that the Cavs, would get the number one pick. That did not happen. They had the third pick. My dad was absolutely ecstatic. He's a big Pistons fan and everything. And it was announced that Cade Cunningham, the only team he will have a workout with, is the Detroit Pistons, who have the first pick. And he is, easily, I would say, the best prospect in the 2021 NBA draft. So, what are your thoughts on the Pistons getting the first pick and Cade Cunningham most likely going to Detroit?
Okay, so I'm not a like an expert of the rookies that are coming in, but Cade Cunningham to me seems like the most ready player. Even though the OK State didn't do well in the tournament, we've had other players like that. KD didn't do super great with Texas when he was in the tournament. Like there's been other guys. You just kind of got to be able to watch their game and agree whether or not you think that they'll be great. This Pistons team is coming together really nicely because they got a young kid in the draft who was banged up last year, I think at like 6 or 7, which was Killian Hayes. And he can really handle the ball too. If you can have him as like a backup, bring him along with Cade Cunningham or maybe move him over to a 2 where Cade plays the 2 when Hayes is on the floor. But then you also have a rangy, good defender in Sadiq Bey, who they have there in Detroit, who's a rookie, and Stewart, a big man. So they have a good young nucleus in Detroit. I think whoever gets to coach this team for a long time, they're going to be competitive in the East for the next couple of years. And I don't even really think you need to waste other people's time with other workouts if you just know for a fact. If you meet Cade and he comes in and works out and he's 75% of what you thought he was going to be or whatever, then you just take him because he's the consensus one. Otherwise, if you're the Pistons and he's not your guy, you trade out. But the Pistons can't be doing dumb stuff with the number one pick, first of all, because like I told you before this, I grew up a big Pistons fan from Michigan as a kid. When they drafted Darko Milicic over Carmelo Anthony, I was going to lose my mind because Carmelo was going to fit on that early 2000s team so nicely. right? With Chauncey Billups and Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace, and then you get Carmelo mixed in there somewhere. The team would have been great. And they take Darko Milicic. What? People don't remember him? Because it was a terrible pick. They should have never taken him, but they did. Detroit, don't mess around with this pick. Take Cade Cunningham and just let the history fall where you know where it's gonna be. It'll be great.
In Darko's defense, he does have more championships than Carmelo. I'll give him that. I mean, it might basically be a sympathy ring, not playing at all. But well, that's the only thing you kind of say for Darko, and better than Melo. But Kate Cunningham, I completely agree with what you mentioned. They have guys like Bay and Killian Hayes, who's coming off an injury. They also have a really, really nice coach in Dwayne Casey. He actually won Coach of the Year the year he got fired, which is something you really don't see really in any sports, any sport. But Dwayne Casey is one of the better coaches in the NBA, and I really think the Pistons, at first it was looking like this rebuild was going to be horrible. They got rid of Drummond. They basically bought his contract out. Same thing with Blake Griffin. And I believe they've not won a playoff game. It's not a series, but a game. I believe in like a decade or so, or just something insane. And I think Dwayne Casey can kind of be that coach. And they're getting some young, nice pieces. In a couple of years, they can be one of the better teams in the East. Because like you mentioned, Ben Simmons is definitely going to be gone from Philly. Tatum and Brown, their contracts are going to end up, not too far from now. And the Pistons in a couple of years might be one of those better teams in the East because once these three young guys can develop, they're going to have a very, very nice team, especially with a nice coach in Casey. Because to me, I would say he's probably definitely a top 10. I would say probably maybe even a top 5 coach in the NBA. There's not many better coaches in the NBA you can have helping for a rebuild than Casey in Detroit.
Yeah, I think I talked about this last night. There's two kinds of coaches in the NBA. There's a Steve Nash type coach, where you're Steve Kerr type coach, where you're sort of there to manage egos. Like you're sort of there to manage people that are already on a superstar level. And then there's guys that work better in the development aspect. And there's some all-time greats who can do both, like Popovich and Phil Jackson or whatever. But Dwayne Casey definitely was wonderful with Toronto. And I think the year he left and Nick Nurse comes in and wins a title. Now the difference is that Dwayne Casey was working with DeMar DeRozan and not Kawhi Leonard. I think that Dwayne Casey could have done better there. Here's the thing, and I'll say this just sort of like as a ridiculous statement. We haven't even finished the current season we're in right now. But the Pistons, with a couple of breaks, Jeremy Grant is a good player. And Cade Cunningham comes in. If he can play Rookie of the Year ball, maybe 8 assists, 7-8 assists with 20 points, maybe the Pistons are an 8 seed and they're in the playoffs next year. It's not like the East is some world beater, especially if they have this thing where they allow for the play-in tournament to run it back. Maybe the Pistons are like the 9 or 10, and they get hot, win a couple games, and they get it, sort of a Memphis into the Eastern Conference playoffs next year. They're not going to be in that top 5-6 teams in the East, but next year this team under Dwayne Casey, all that young talent that we just talked about, Pistons could be a playoff team next year in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And depending how free agency goes, I don't think that's that wild of a prediction. I completely forgot about Jeremy Grant. He was one of those guys. They signed at the time. The contract was just absolutely ridiculous. You're signing a guy to a huge deal who's never had a really, really nice season. And, he has a great season with Detroit. There was lots of teams actually asking Detroit to maybe try to get him. I know Boston was one, and yeah, I mean, Lakers, Boston. I mean, when teams like that want you, you got to be doing something right. And Detroit, they have a really nice young future, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see, how they perform, this upcoming season with so many young players. Maybe they can get to the playoffs, maybe get closer, something like that. It kind of reminds me, what the Cavs. They have Sexton, Okoro, Garland. They have some nice young guards. they have Love, who he's hurt every other game. He has to wear a box that says broken glass on him because he's always hurt so much. But I don't. I don't see a huge difference between the Cavs and the Pistons. And it's really strange because the Cavs have some really nice young guards. They don't have, terrible big guys. Jared Allen. I was kind of mentioning the Celtics getting a big guy. I would probably rather have Jared Allen than Evan Fournier in Boston. But they have some nice young guys, and it's like they started, I believe, like 10-10 or something like that. And to finish the season, they were like 10-30. Like I don't understand what's going on really with the Cavs, and I kind of see a similar situation. If the Cavs can kind of get maybe one more guy to sign in free agency, I can see the Cavs and the Pistons having eventually being some of the better teams in the East, maybe like 3 or 4 years now.
Well, okay, so I really am a fan of Garland and Sexton. I would say the difference to me is Jeremy Grant, and they were able to get somebody to sign there, and that's what's going to happen. You're going to pay a little bit more for a guy that people don't really view as a max player when you live in Cleveland or Detroit, because these guys are not trying to sign max contracts in the Midwest. The winters are cold. The Timberwolves, Pacers, all those teams in that area of the country where we used to live, guys aren't signing max deals to go there. They may extend there if they get drafted there, but they're not choosing that as a destination. So Jeremy Grant going there, people were like, bro, you're overpaying for this guy. The thing is that he had played in some big playoff games with Denver. He had shown what he could do. Now imagine if you gave him the floor and you allowed him to play. And that's what they did. So if Jeremy Grant can stay healthy, he's the difference between your comparison of Detroit and them, because I do like Sexton. I do like Darius Garland. The problem is like, where's the veteran guy that's been through it and done it before? That's where I lose you. But there's also there's so much young talent on the Pistons if they stay healthy. Jared Allen is good, but he's kind of the dying version of a big man. Like I said, can he be Ayton? Because that's the bare minimum of what you need from your center. Is like, unless I don't even want to get started on Rudy Gobert and what he is and what he's not.
But I completely agree with what you said there. You're going to have to overpay some guys, to play in some of your markets. That's kind of, I was reading something the other day. That's kind of what the Cavs, as of right now, are probably going to do. I saw they might give Jared Allen a max contract for $100, which I think that, I like Allen. That is way too much. The absolute most I'm giving Allen is probably about 18 a year. He's good, and I think the Nets trading him and that Harden trade was a big reason why they did not have near as much success in the playoffs as some people thought. That was one downfall of that trade, getting Harden. But to me, I really don't think he's that much. If they can re-sign him, I think they can have somewhat of a nice future along with the Pistons, because I really do think the Pistons are going to be one of the better teams in the East in a couple of years. I mean, with all that talent and a great coach, I think out of all the teams in the East, I would say they probably have the best future, because all these young guys, they're on rookie contracts. I mean, once you get them, their max contracts, that's completely different. There's zero chance you're able to keep all these guys by giving them max contracts. But I'm very interested, in the Pistons' future and their rebuild and everything. And you kind of mentioned DeAndre Ayton, and that kind of goes to the next topic. That game last night between the Phoenix Suns and the Clippers, I do not watch a ton of NBA games. I mainly, honestly, watch the Cavs and the Celtics, and I watch some games, but not a ton. That game to me yesterday was probably game of the year so far. The last minute and a half was absolutely phenomenal. I saw something the other day, last night. The last minute and a half of that game took 33 minutes in real time. That is just absolutely crazy. I mean, the last minutes, George and Booker were trading back shots. The DeAndre Ayton, lob with 0.9 seconds left was insane. I've seen one other, play like that before. That was in college basketball years ago, but that was definitely one of the craziest finishes we've seen in the NBA in quite some time. And then, something that wasn't really talked about was Cousins pushing Booker at the end when the game actually wasn't even over. This was a phenomenal game. I wish more NBA games were like this. To me, this is probably a game of the year, only because I do not watch a ton of NBA. But what are your thoughts, on this game and the Suns and Clippers series and everything?
It was definitely one of the games of the year. I mean, just the magnitude, the opportunity to go to the NBA Finals is on the line, and you have a Clippers team that is just fighting, without their best player in Kawhi Leonard, and you need the road victory. This is the third series in a row where they've gone down 0-2. It's just like they're right there. You get your best player at the line, who wants the ball. Paul George goes, gets the ball in the inbound, gets fouled, goes to the line, and misses two free throws. And then Pandemic P starts trending. And it's just like even more nicknames. This morning when I woke up, Shannon was calling him Polyester P because he shrinks. I was like, okay, that's a good one. I can chuckle at that. I, Here's the thing. I've seen some finishes like this over the years. The one that was jumping to mind last night during the live stream was uh, Derek Fisher and Tim Duncan in a Western Conference Finals traded shots. It was like Tim Duncan makes this sort of from behind the free throw line, fading away, leaning over, Shaq's in his face, and he makes the ball and it goes in with like zero point 0.4 seconds. We weren't even sure if you could get anything like that. And Derek Fisher makes a shot with zero point 0.4 seconds to win the game. The Lakers win the game. I believe they end up going on to the NBA Finals that year. But there's those kind of finishes. This play that's drawn up to me is like this is indefensible because with zero point 0.9 seconds on the clock, I'm much more comfortable just protecting the rim. Like, how do you not have your inbound guy? It doesn't even matter. In basketball, on the inbound, you're supposed to be guarding the rim. You're the guy going this way. He should have just been jumping up and down, up and down. And then Zubats, who was terrible last night, allows Aiton to get him again for the bucket, the lob at the basket. Perfect execution by the Suns, and a letdown, poor execution in my opinion by them. But it was a very fun game. I would argue the 33 minutes was kind of annoying. Like I don't know, maybe I'm kind of old school. I'm not the kind of person that's like, hey, we need to get everything right. We need to review every foul. We need to review every out of bounds. I just sort of go with what they do in real time and just live with the result. But yes, I was going back and forth. And as somebody who hates both the teams playing, I just wanted devastation and I got it. My brother-in-law is a Clippers fan. Suck it. They lost, the Clippers lose, and I'm happy about it.
Yeah, this game was just absolutely, crazy and everything. And you kind of mentioned, players being at the rim. I would probably have multiple players at the rim trying to defend the lob, taking my chances as somebody, with a, long, big three. Because the one bad thing about, guarding a situation like this, you have to guard, like if they're shooting a three or something like that, you got to guard them, but you can't guard them like too good in the way. I know it sounds kind of weird because with NBA and officiating at times, it's absolutely ridiculous. You don't want to cause a chance of possibly fouling somebody and having them take, two or three, free throws and everything to possibly take the lead. And, up until that, both of those free throw misses by Paul George, he was playing really good in the fourth. And, the last few minutes, trading shots with Devin Booker. And that's one of those things that's like Paul George can have a great game, and you'll see on Twitter like Paul George isn't trending. But when Paul George is like not playing great, he'll be the number one trend, number two trend, number three trend. It's just really, I don't know. It's really hypocrisy in a way. Like you'll talk about George when he's horrible, but when he's great, oh, he should play great. But at the same time, they're playing without their best player. You can make a case for the Suns. It's kind of debatable, especially with CP3, how much he means to the Suns this year. But Devin Booker has really took that next step and being a great player, definitely being one of the better players in the NBA. But this was just insane. as of right now, what would probably be your prediction for the outcome for the rest of the series?
It's tough to say because we don't know the Kawhi injury, right? So like if I knew that Kawhi was coming back, I would say the Clippers have a chance to bring this thing to 7 games. But I don't know that. I think CP3 will be back for game 3, game 4 at the latest it looks like. So this could be a real short series. If CP3 comes back and there's no Kawhi Leonard, I mean, the Suns could keep rolling because I know that a lot of people want to give love to Devin Booker, but DeAndre Ayton has been playing the best basketball of his life. Cameron Payne has been ridiculously great. Like at some points playing better than CP3. I know that he had the shoulder injury. I'm not saying he is better for anybody watching. What I am saying is that he has had spurts where he's quicker, he's making threes at a very high clip. And then you get guys that are super confident coming off the bench in Cam Johnson who's knocking down shots. So it's like I would say if there's no Kawhi, this thing's over in probably 5 games. If Kawhi comes back, we could get to a game 7 just because I think Kawhi has that sort of superstar ability that I don't see on the Suns. But I just want to say this real quick about the .9 seconds. Do you have any idea how hard it is to catch a basketball and gather and shoot in .9 seconds? Like the only chance they had was a lob to the rim, and they gave it up. Like this, that's why it was just the worst play defensively that the Clippers could have done. It's garbage. There's .9 seconds. It is almost impossible to gather and shoot with .9 seconds.
Yeah, the Clippers finding a way to lose kind of reminds me, how the Bengals always find a way to lose. They'll be in it and then somehow they completely screw it up. But it's really interesting because if Leonard comes back and a CP3 comes back, and I going into the playoffs, I think my prediction was the Nets over the Lakers in 6, and then it switched. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was the Nets over the Suns, and now clearly the Nets are out. Basically, at this point, it's just the most healthiest teams in the East and the West. And this, I saw something the other day which was very interesting. I actually thought it would have been the complete opposite. The NBA ratings from this playoffs has I believe around a 30 or 20 or 30% increase from last year's playoffs. It's really strange because there's no LeBron and there's lots of superstars being injured and everything. But this just makes, in a way, the NBA playoffs more fun to watch because it's so much more intriguing. You don't know what player is going to step up, like a DeAndre Ayton. He's been good this season, but this playoffs and with CP3 being out, he's really played the best basketball of his life. I want to say the Suns in 6 because I think Leonard will eventually come back, but I think it'll probably be a little too late for the Clippers. But if Leonard can come back earlier, it's really hard to tell. One thing though, I think whoever wins this series will probably end up winning the finals. I don't think the Suns can match up with the Bucks. I know the Bucks, have Giannis, has some really nice guys like Holiday and Middleton, but the way the Suns are playing right now, even without CP3, I think it's going to be very difficult. Just not for the Bucks to beat them, but just for any single team in the NBA right now to beat them. I believe they have a 6 or 7 game win streak in the playoffs right now. It's absolutely insane. I'm very interested in the Suns. And it's just kind of weird because you look at the Suns, they're a team who's not been in the playoffs prior to the season like a decade. The past decade, they've been one of the worst teams in the league. Fans have been very vocal about how horrible their front office is. You trade to get Chris Paul, one of the best point guards of all time. And, he has been a huge piece to their, team and everything, being one of the best teams in the league. I'm just very interested in the Suns. This is not something you see every day. A team who has been horrible for the past decade, all of a sudden are the best team in the NBA right now. I think if whoever wins this series, though, I think will ultimately probably end up winning the finals.
Well, I think that it kind of goes to the point of like you can build a team through the draft and then add the pieces that put you over the top, right? So it's like you can thank this guy jumps on the Warzone a lot. Thank you. Call him Flash Johnson. We appreciate you. I would I would say this. If you're looking at the Suns, you go, hey, if we can find ourselves a Devin Booker and we can develop a big man in Aiton, which a lot of people thought was a mistake as a first pick, and then we add a veteran to come in. It's tough to add veterans like CP3, but they're out there. You can bring in guys like that. You can develop your team, just like what we were talking about with the Pistons. Maybe in a few years they go out and they add a veteran center, down low. They can get somebody, uh, but I don't want to go too far down that road. The the two healthiest teams to me have been the Suns and been the Bucks. And that is really where we are headed. I will also say about the ratings thing that you mentioned, I think just being in a pandemic and people were really freaking out, and then on top of it, the NBA was getting into a lot of political stuff, whatever side you want to fall on there. I think that that did rub a lot of people the wrong way. And then even the people that they were supposed to be embracing, they were kind of annoyed that the NBA was even continuing to play basketball when they felt like the world was on fire. So it's like I think that that's out, but also too like we're coming out of this, people are looking for entertainment, they're looking for distractions, they're looking for ways to spend money and their time and whatever. And so I think the basketball is a nice sort of respite from what we've been in. And I'm not shocked that the ratings are up. I'm actually happy about this because this is going to be great. This is what everybody should want. We want teams that aren't from LA and New York and Miami and Chicago. We want these other cities to be represented so that everybody feels like they actually have a real shot. Like it's not like there's more parity, like what we have in the NFL. Like a team from Kansas City can compete with a team from, you know, LA, New York, Boston, the bigger cities that we see out there.
Yeah, it's kind of been the way with the playoffs this season. It seems like every single team has a chance with all the injuries and everything, and it makes it so much more entertaining. And yeah, that aspect I could understand. Why the ratings are up and everything, and it's just going to be very interesting to see how this rest of this series plays out. If Leonard comes back, when CP3 will come back for Phoenix, definitely a very intriguing way to start off the series 2-0 for the Suns. They've been playing great, but it's not been lopsided. The Clippers, despite being down 0-2, have played for the most part really nice as well. They desperately need Kawhi Leonard to come back because that's their only chance of coming back and winning this series. And kind of switching gears over to the NFL, this was something I kind of thought was interesting. It was last week, this was kind of around right after my episode. I only do about once a week. Free agent running back Le'Veon Bell had comments on Andy Reid and said he'd rather retire before playing for Andy Reid again. What are your thoughts, kind of, on Bell's comments and everything on Andy Reid?
Um, it's interesting to me because I don't really, I don't think a lot of people are going to be sitting in that boat with Le'Veon Bell. But maybe Le'Veon and Andy Reid had a conversation where he was like, "Hey, you're going to be a bigger part of this offense. You're going to be whatever, 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 right?" And then he gets there, and Andy Reid realizes what a lot of fans think they notice, and that he just doesn't have it anymore. He doesn't have that gear. He doesn't have that ability to be dynamic like he was in Pittsburgh, and that he hasn't been the same player since he held out. So like I believe that they're both entitled to their opinions. I just think a lot less people are going to share the opinion on Andy Reid, who seems to be loved by 95% of the people that have ever played for him. Like I don't see a lot of players coming out in Philly or KC saying, "Oh yeah, Andy Reid, I can't play for that guy. He's horrible." So to me, it feels a little bit of like sour grapes because he was, grabbing his shoulder pads on the sidelines in the Super Bowl, and maybe he felt like it could have been his moment to make a couple of plays, and he didn't really get out there at all once he got to the Chiefs. But I think that they just realized they had better options than him at running back, and that kind of made him upset because he could have went somewhere else. Maybe he goes to another one of these teams and he gets on the field a little more. Maybe Buffalo. Buffalo needs running back. So I don't know. I don't disagree with the comments. Like he's clearly entitled to say that. Like why not?
The interesting thing about Le'Veon Bell was, he holds out in Pittsburgh. he gets a contract. It's about what he was going to get anyway. He did not get more money by holding out. He goes to the Jets. The holdout. He signs with the Jets. It was basically the contract he was going to get. He did not get more money than he thought he was going to get. Plays horrible with the Jets. Really underperformed. I know their offensive line was bad, but if you're going to make an excuse, if people make an excuse for Le'Veon Bell, people should be making an excuse for Sam Darnold. But with Le'Veon Bell, he had issues in Pittsburgh. He had issues with Adam Gase with the New York Jets. He goes to the Chiefs, trying to get a Super Bowl ring, which I thought was kind of funny. He signs with the Chiefs, trying to get a ring, and he doesn't. That might be because I cannot stand him. I'm a big Bengals fan. But then he has issues with Andy Reid, who, like you said, is probably one of the more likable coaches in the NFL. I remember, he started stuff, with different players on Twitter before. I knew he was kind of starting stuff with Joe Mixon on Twitter several years ago. But it's like when there's, problems in Pittsburgh, in New York, in Kansas City, and you're starting stuff online with different players, and he tries to play the victim, and, I'm never going to play for him again. At what point do kind of people realize it's probably not all three of those places? It's pretty much just probably you. And stuff like this, Le'Veon Bell is not nearly as good as what he used to be. He's not been good at all the past couple of years. And a stupid comment like this, I understand he might be, giving his honest opinion. But it's times like this, once you get 28, 29, 30 years old as a running back, it's a lot harder to find a job in the NFL because you're not nearly as productive and you got a lot higher chance of getting an injury. But Le'Veon Bell, I don't know if he's going to sign with anybody after this. I think he might, but something like this, I don't think is necessary because you aren't for sure making a roster because you've underperformed drastically the past several seasons, and people know you had issues in 3 different teams. They know there's not going to be issues on a great play, like a great team like the Chiefs. All of a sudden, when you get there, to me, this definitely hurt Le'Veon Bell's chances to me on pretty much signing anywhere wherever he goes in free agency.
See, NFL is a weird spot because running back is a delicate position. There will be injuries, Training camp will start up, a few preseason games. Guys are going to get banged up. Hopefully nothing serious. There will be spots. There will be places that can bring a veteran back in who can pick up protection, who knows how to run inside, and you can give the ball. If Frank Gore was still playing last year, and I forget the other old guy that was Marshawn Lynch was out there a couple of years, within the last, 16 months, there's still going to be an opportunity for him to get to carry the ball. But I agree with you. When you're on marriage number 4, sometimes you got to say all my exes weren't horrible people. Maybe I did something wrong after I said I do. So, Le'Veon Bell, I don't think that he's done. I do think there are teams that will give him a shot, whether it's due to injury or they just think, hey, he's a cheap veteran deal. We can bring him in. The thing is that if he feels like he's lied to, then he's going to be bitter. That's the thing, is he feels like, and you can't tell people any different when they feel like they've been lied to.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Bell, though, is you kind of mentioned Buffalo, and you kind of expect teams who are going to be good to maybe sign, Bell to get, more depth at running back. But at the same time, if, he's kind of had issues in 3 different places, I think it's it's pretty risky for a team like Buffalo or, I don't know, maybe a team similar to the Chiefs on signing him, who just one step away or so from a Super Bowl, possibly, messing up that locker room and everything. But I'm anxious to see where Bell goes. I mean, it's not going to be the Chiefs, the Jets, or the Steelers because apparently all those places are bad and Bell did nothing wrong. But I'm anxious to see where he goes. Hopefully, I would say hopefully not the AFC North, but it doesn't really matter because he's not nearly as good as what he used to be. But that does kind of bring something interesting. I kind of mentioned AFC North. Lamar Jackson, he's been negotiating some contract extensions. The interesting thing about Lamar Jackson, he does not have an agent. And this is very, very interesting in my opinion. What are your thoughts on this whole Lamar Jackson situation?
Well, he may not have an agent, but he's definitely going to consult some, like there's some person who comes in, some lawyer that gets a smaller fee than taking 10, because as somebody who's dealt with agents, they're good and bad, but they get a nice chunk of your money. So it, with Lamar Jackson, it's great. Get the deal, get the money. I have no worries. I'm not nearly as concerned with other people. I think for a first big contract, I'm giving him everything he wants. Now, second contract, even if he plays amazing, I'm a little bit more worried because his the thing that puts him over the top is his ability to use his legs. And as that ages, just like we worry about running backs, we also have to worry about that with quarterbacks who use their legs. And not like Aaron Rodgers. He uses his legs. Ryan Tannehill uses his legs or whatever. I'm talking about the thing that separates you from everybody else is your legs. He now has to show with whatever the length of this contract is, if it's 4, 5, 6 years, in that span, he has to then show, oh, I'm not just somebody who's going to beat you with my legs. I'm going to beat you more often than not with my arm, and that will make the contract worth it. I have no reservations about Lamar Jackson, what he can do. I think that this kid works hard. I think he's focused on football. I think he's going to figure it out. I love the weapons they brought in. I hope he negotiates a great deal for himself and family and whatever. And I know you're in the AFC North, but man, I love Lamar Jackson, and I would pay him. I'd give him whatever he wants for at least the next 5 years.
And you bring up great point, and that makes it really interesting. Like in the fact, like you have to pay him as a quarterback and not as a running back. And I know that sounds crazy because you look at Lamar Jackson, you take away the rushing ability, he's a completely different player. He's a much better runner than he is a passer. That speaks for itself. It's well known, it's obvious, but he's a much better athlete than a quarterback, if that makes sense. He's a good quarterback, but as an athlete standpoint, he's a much better athlete than a quarterback. I'm taking Russell Wilson or a guy something like that over Lamar Jackson. But if we're talking about just athletic ability, Lamar Jackson is probably the most athletic quarterback in the league right now, and it's very interesting not having an agent and negotiating contracts like how much you're going to get paid because to me, Lamar Jackson is really good, but I honestly don't know. I'm not really a fan of Jackson, but to me, it's like it. Look at his playoff games. I honestly think you look at the playoff games Lamar Jackson has played, and I one thing straight. I'm not saying Andy Dalton is better than Lamar Jackson or comparing Lamar Jackson to Andy Dalton. I'm simply saying look at Lamar Jackson's playoff games the past first couple of seasons. Look at Andy Dalton's playoff games first couple of seasons. They are pretty similar. Lamar Jackson's a top 5 quarterback, supposedly. Honestly, I don't think he is, but I think he's really, really good. But he's a athlete, not so much as a great quarterback. The playoff things, to me, is what really separates his contract. The one playoff win they had this past season against Tennessee, people don't want to talk about it, but he absolutely played horrible. The Baltimore Ravens defense was a major part on why that helped get the win over the Titans. Lamar Jackson, the playoff games to me, if Lamar Jackson can win multiple playoff games this season or win a playoff game or two and actually perform really well, to me, that is definitely going to boost his contract and money per year up by a lot. But the playoff issue to me, like if I'm negotiating contracts with him, I'm the Ravens. I think that has a lot to do, how they perform in the playoffs this season, because it's like he can be great in the regular season, but once it goes to the playoffs, he's Andy Dalton's brother. Like I don't think Lamar Jackson is worth like a Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, something like that. I think he's kind of more in the 8 to 12 range, but I think it has a lot depending on how the Ravens perform this season.
So I feel a little bit of your bias coming through on this because when you're when you're debating, when you're like in that section of your life and you're trying to figure out how much you want to wager on something going forward, you do have to factor in the past, but you also have to factor in the future mixture with what's going on currently. If you're seeing this guy work day to day, then you have to say, okay, he's already gotten us here. Most first round contracts, you're not going to get Russell, you're not going to get Patrick Mahomes. Russell won with a great defense. Patrick Mahomes was an MVP and won a Super Bowl. So it's like you're not going to get a lot of that on the first contract. Like people are wavering on Baker. Baker just got the Browns to the playoffs, which is like seems like a Herculean effort after the last 20 years of football in Cleveland. Like the Ravens are used to winning, but they win with defense. Now they have somebody who's ultra dynamic at the position. You would be betting on him taking everything that he's already done, which is MVP. He did have good passing numbers a few years ago. And now we've invested in receivers, young talent that we won't have to overpay, brought in veterans. Can he take the next steps? And that's what you're betting on. You're betting on that. But what you're saying is you're betting on him being an average quarterback with great athleticism. And the Ravens should be betting on him, if they think this, great athleticism and the quarterback play rising to the same level. And then you have a great player. My thing is if you let him go, what are your options? It's cold out there when you let him go. If you let him go, I guarantee you there are several other teams that would jump in and say, hey, Lamar, what do you want? You want to come play football for us here? We'll pay you whatever Baltimore says they wouldn't pay you because that's what kind of player he is. And that's what he's going to get.
The thing with Jackson to me, even if Jackson plays bad in the playoffs, if I'm the Ravens, I'm still definitely re-signing him. But I just think it has a lot like per year salary. That's the issue with moving to playoffs. Like if he wins, if they go to the AFC Championship game and he plays really good in the playoffs, to me that has a huge impact and a lot more money on his salary. But it plays like really bad in the playoffs like it has in the past. I think he's going to get less money, regardless if he plays good in the playoffs or not. If I'm Baltimore, I'm still definitely re-signing him. I think he's a much better athlete than his quarterback. He's a really good quarterback, but the athleticism of him really separates him from any other quarterback. But I just really think like if they go to the AFC Championship game or they go to the Super Bowl, I mean, obviously you're going to re-sign him, but you got to give him like top 3 quarterback numbers when it comes to salary. If he struggles a lot in the playoffs, I'm still 100% signing him if I'm Baltimore because you've basically made your whole offense like helping him, like giving him lots of running backs and lots of wide receivers that really fit, his style and scheme of, passing and everything. Regardless if I'm Baltimore, I'm still definitely signing Jackson. I just think the number standpoint and per year salary, it has a lot of implications on how Jackson performs in the playoffs this upcoming season.
Okay. I'm just kind of curious. Would you feel the same way about Josh Allen? Do you have reservations about Josh Allen at all?
If I'm the Buffalo Bills, like if he struggles in the playoffs this season, like if I'm the Bills, I'm still re-signing him. But if he goes to the AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl, the same thing with Jackson. I think you have to have a major, increase on per year salary. And Josh Allen is another guy that really his athleticism and his height, like 6'5", 6'6", a guy who runs one of the best running quarterbacks in the league. Something we don't really see, often ever. His athleticism, kind of similar to Jackson, but not nearly as much, really separates him as well. Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson to me are very similar in this style. Similar because if I'm both those teams, I'm definitely re-signing them. But how they perform in the postseason has a major impact on how much I'm giving per year salary.
Okay, so then I'll make this point really quick. People were down on Josh Allen. He's inaccurate. He can't throw the ball. He's not going to be able to pass in this league. He does a lot of stuff with his legs, right? Look at how big and athletic he is. That's what he gets done. They went and got him Stephon Diggs, and he was a monster. You have to get guys that you can throw to. Who he was throwing to Hollywood Brown and Willie Snead and whatever else. So I think that you have to get Lamar Jackson some weapons first before we decide that he can't throw the ball. That's my opinion on Lamar Jackson. Is he hasn't had anybody to throw the ball to. I believe that has changed. I like Tylan Wallace. I like Bateman. And if Sammy Watkins can stay healthy for 6-8 games, whatever he does every year, then now all of a sudden Mark Andrews gets maybe a few less double teams, and now Andrews is a bigger weapon too. So, and Hollywood Brown is still there. I think for the first time we're going to get to see Lamar Jackson. He's going to ball this year, in my opinion.
The thing with Jackson, with Allen, I think Allen is a better passer than Jackson. I obviously think Jackson's a much better athlete than Allen. I think there's some, overall, I think they're closer than people think, but I'm going to give the edge to Jackson. But the thing with Jackson and the Ravens getting some recent wide receivers in the draft, you can have all the wide receivers in Baltimore. Jackson, with better wide receivers, obviously Jackson's going to improve as a passer. But I do not think Baltimore is ever going to be that team with Lamar Jackson as a quarterback who's ever going to be a pass first team. They have so many running backs in their committee that they continue to sign. J.K. Dobbins, they sign a running back. It seems like every single month they just get more, guys in there, the depth. But I think, getting weapons for Jackson is great because when you're a quarterback, if you don't have weapons, it's going to be hard to have, great numbers and everything. But, despite, them getting some nice wide receivers like Bateman and Sammy Watkins, I still think they're going to be a run first team, but it's going to be more balanced, but you're not going to see as many, runs for Jackson. You're going to see more passing. But to me, the Ravens are still always going to be that run first team type of situation as long as they have Jackson because their offensive scheme kind of fits Jackson's way and, running mobility and stuff like that, running out of the pocket and throwing. I'm interested to see how, Jackson kind of performs with these new wide receivers, but I really think Baltimore will always be a run first team as long as Jackson's their quarterback.
All right, we'll see. It'll be interesting.
It is kind of interesting because, I'm not going to lie. I don't like Jackson. I don't like Mayfield. I mean, obviously, I don't like Roethlisberger. And I try not to be biased, but if anybody likes their, division rival starting quarterback, there is kind of something wrong with you. But Jackson, it's very interesting. I think he's a great athlete. He's a good quarterback. The thing, you take his athleticism away, similar to Josh Allen. They're not nearly as good quarterbacks. But with Jackson, it's very interesting. Jackson, to me, is definitely one of the most intriguing starting quarterbacks going into the season because how he performs in the postseason has a major implication on what his contract would be. Regardless, I'm 100% certain. I would say Lamar Jackson will play for Baltimore with his extension. He's going to get an extension no matter what. But how he performs in the playoffs, and Josh Allen, kind of the same way, just has their playoff performances can push their contracts over the edge. Maybe be a top 3 quarterback when it comes to contracts and everything. So, we kind of talked about a lot of stuff. Kemba Walker being traded to OKC, some NBA head coaching openings. Detroit getting the first overall pick and possibly getting Cade Cunningham. Possible game of the year with the Suns and Clippers yesterday. Le'Veon Bell's comments on Andy Reid. And Lamar Jackson and his negotiating his huge contract. So, Tony, can you tell some of the listeners who can follow you on social media?
Yeah. Follow me at the Warzone Sports Network over on YouTube. That would be the number one place I would like you to go. Any Twitch users, if you have a Twitch, follow the Warzone on Twitch. We're trying to grow that over there and become affiliates. But yeah, engage with us, reach out, let us know, collaborations, all that fun stuff at the Warzone Sports Network, talking about NBA, MMA, NFL, MLB, whatever. Let's horse racing. Let's gamble. Let's talk sports, have fun, and hang out. It's always a good time over at the Warzone Sports Network.
Yeah, I'll definitely put the links in the description below for the Warzone Sports Network. It's a really nice channel. I have lots of great content there. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time on Sports 200.